You know what your problem is, Naomi. Matthew's voice cut through the courthouse hallway like a blade. You actually thought you deserved better than this. The divorce papers trembled in Naomi Walker's hands as her ex-husband's laughter echoed off the cold marble walls. 22 years of marriage reduced to signatures and legal jargon, witnessed by strangers who'd never seen her make his coffee every morning or iron his shirts while he slept. Mama, why is Daddy saying those things? 8-year-old Zoe tugged at Naomi's coat, her voice barely a whisper. Naomi knelt down, forcing her shaking hands steady as she smoothed her daughter's braids. Sometimes people say hurtful things when they are scared, baby girl. But Matthew wasn't done. His new girlfriend, barely 25 with perfectly straightened hair and designer heels, wrapped her arm around his waist like she was claiming territory. At least now you can stop pretending you're something you're not, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The small crowd that had gathered, other people waiting for their own legal proceedings, watched the scene unfold like it was entertainment. Naomi felt their stares burning into her skin. They whispered judgments following her as she gathered her children and walked toward the exit. Broken, someone muttered behind her. Should have seen this coming. 12-year-old Benjamin walked beside her in silence, his jaw clenched the same way his father's used to get when he was angry. But his anger wasn't directed at her. It was for her. The realization broke something inside Naomi's chest that she didn't know was still whole. The automatic doors opened, and February air hit them like a slap. Riverdale, Georgia wasn't much to look at on a good day, but today it felt like the entire town was holding its breath, waiting to see how far she'd fall. Mrs. Walker. The voice belonged to Janet Chapman, president of the PTA and self-appointed town gossip coordinator. She practically jogged across the parking lot, her phone already in her hand. I heard about the proceedings. How are you holding up? The question sounded sympathetic, but Naomi had known Janet long enough to recognize the hunger in her eyes. This wasn't concern, it was information gathering. We're managing just fine, thank you, Naomi replied, fishing her car keys from her purse. Of course. It's just. Janet's voice dropped to what she probably thought was a whisper. People are saying Matthew cleaned you out. Left you with nothing but the house payments and those credit card bills. I mean, what are you going to do for work? The diner barely pays minimum wage, and with 2 children. Benjamin stepped forward, his young face twisted with protective fury. My mama doesn't need your fake concern, Mrs. Chapman. Janet's mouth fell open at being called out by a 12-year-old, but before she could respond, Naomi placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. Benjamin's right, she said quietly. We don't need anything from anyone. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description. As they drove away from the courthouse, Naomi caught sight of Matthew in her rearview mirror. He was talking animatedly with a group of men from the auto shop where he worked, probably already spinning the story of how he'd finally escaped his demanding wife. The same wife who'd worked double shifts at Rosa's diner to help pay for his mechanic certification. The same wife who'd smiled and nodded when he brought his buddies home for beer and poker every Friday night, cleaning up their mess without complaint. Mama. Zoe's voice was small from the back seat. Are we poor now? The question hit harder than Matthew's cruelest words. Naomi had grown up poor, really poor, and had spent her entire adult life fighting to give her children something better. The house Matthew had left her with came with a mortgage she couldn't afford on her diner wages. The credit cards he'd maxed out were all in her name. The checking account he'd emptied before filing for divorce had contained their entire savings. We're going to be okay, she said, though the words felt like lies in her mouth. We're going to figure it out. But as they pulled into the driveway of their modest 2-story home on Maple Street, Naomi saw Mrs. Henderson from next door quickly duck behind her curtains. Across the street, the Thompsons were pretending to check their mailbox while obviously watching her every move. By tomorrow, the entire town would know every detail of her humiliation. By next week, they'd all have theories about what she'd done wrong, what she could have done differently, how they would have handled it better. Inside the house, the silence felt oppressive. 22 years of shared memories seemed to mock her from every corner. The family photos Matthew had left behind because they weren't worth taking. The wedding china they'd received as gifts and never used because he preferred eating off paper plates. The dreams they'd built together that now felt like elaborate lies. Benjamin went straight to his room without a word. Zoe curled up on the couch with her stuffed elephant, the one Matthew had won for her at the county fair 3 summers ago when he still pretended to be a devoted father. Naomi walked to the kitchen and pulled out the stack of bills that had been accumulating for weeks. Past due notices, final warnings, court summons from credit card companies. Each envelope felt like another nail in the coffin of the life she'd tried so hard to build. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Heard about the divorce. Always knew Matthew would trade up eventually. Some women just can't keep a man satisfied. A friend. She stared at the message until the words blurred together. Someone in this town. Someone who had her phone number. Someone she probably smiled at in the grocery store, had taken time out of their day to kick her while she was down. The house felt like it was closing in around her. Every room held memories of the family they used to be, before Matthew started staying late at work, before the arguments turned vicious, before she found the texts on his phone that confirmed what her heart already knew. She walked to the kitchen junk drawer, the one where she kept batteries and rubber bands and random scraps of paper. Her fingers found the lottery ticket she'd bought 3 days ago, just a silly impulse purchase when she'd stopped for gas. She'd completely forgotten about it until now. The drawing was tonight. In 30 minutes. Naomi almost threw the ticket away. What was the point? She'd never won more than $5 in her entire life. But something made her keep it, maybe the same stubborn hope that had kept her believing in her marriage long after it was dead. Outside, she could hear Janet Chapman's voice carrying across the yard as she updated her neighbor on all the courthouse drama. Their laughter felt like salt in fresh wounds. But as Naomi held that worthless lottery ticket in her trembling hands, she made a promise to herself and her children. No matter what happened next, no matter how hard things got, she would never again let anyone make her feel small. She just had no idea how dramatically that promise was about to be tested. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the darkness at 4:30 a.m., just like it had every weekday for the past 8 years. Naomi's hand fumbled for the snooze button, her body protesting the familiar routine that had become her lifeline. Rosa's diner opened at 5:30, and somebody had to prep the coffee, slice the pies, and set up the breakfast station before the morning rush hit. That somebody was always Naomi, because Rosa Martinez had learned long ago that reliability was rarer than diamonds in small-town Georgia. She moved through her morning routine in the dark, careful not to wake the children. Benjamin had been up late doing homework by the light of his phone. They'd had to choose between the electric bill and groceries last month, and groceries won. Zoe was finally sleeping peacefully after crying herself to sleep, asking when Daddy was coming home. The house felt different now, hollow in a way that had nothing to do with Matthew's missing presence. It was the hollowness of uncertainty, of dreams deferred and promises broken. Every creak of the floorboards reminded her that the mortgage payment was 3 weeks overdue. The lottery ticket sat on her nightstand where she'd left it, forgotten again in the chaos of survival. Rosa's diner squatted on the corner of Main and 3rd like an old friend who'd seen better days. The neon sign flickered between OP and EN, and the parking lot needed repaving, but it served the best coffee and homemade pie in 3 counties. Naomi had started working there part-time when Benjamin was born, just to help with bills. Matthew had promised it was temporary. 22 years later, she was still there. Morning, sunshine. Rosa called from behind the counter as Naomi tied her apron. At 6:02, Rosa Martinez was all sharp edges and soft heart, the kind of woman who'd give you her last dollar and then lecture you about fiscal responsibility. You look like hell, Rosa continued, not unkindly. Court go that bad? Naomi's hands stilled on the coffee filters. She'd known Rosa would ask, but somehow she wasn't prepared for the kindness in the question. After yesterday's parade of false sympathy and barely concealed glee, genuine concern felt foreign. He got the truck, the boat, and his freedom, Naomi said quietly. I got the house, the debt, and the kids he doesn't want to see. Rosa's weathered face hardened. She'd been through her own divorce 30 years ago, back when it was even more scandalous for a woman to leave her husband. What about spousal support? Child support? His lawyer was better than mine. Naomi started the first pot of coffee, the familiar routine soothing her frayed nerves. Turns out when you work under the table fixing cars for cash, your official income looks pretty small. That lying piece of Rosa. Naomi's voice carried a warning. She'd spent months defending Matthew to everyone who'd listen, and old habits died hard. Don't you Rosa me, Mija. I watched that man walk all over you for years while you made excuses for him. Rosa's accent grew thicker when she got emotional, her words sharp with protective fury. You think I didn't notice when you started wearing long sleeves in summer? You think I didn't see you flinch when he raised his voice? The coffee pot slipped in Naomi's hands, hot liquid splashing across the counter. She hadn't realized Rosa had seen so much, had paid such close attention to the slow erosion of her marriage. Matthew had never hit her. She told herself that constantly, like it made the rest acceptable. But there had been moments, especially toward the end, when his anger felt like a living thing with teeth and claws. When she'd learned to read his moods like weather patterns, adjusting her behavior to avoid the storms. He wasn't always like that, she whispered, more to herself than to Rosa. No, baby, they never are. That's how they get you. The bell above the door chimed, and Tommy Chandler walked in with the swagger of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. At 35, he owned Chandler's Hardware, the biggest store in Riverdale, and served on the city council. He was also Naomi's older brother, though they'd barely spoken since their mother's funeral 5 years ago. Well, he said, sliding onto a bar stool like he owned the place. Heard you had quite the day yesterday, little sister. Rosa disappeared into the kitchen with impressive speed, leaving Naomi alone with the brother who'd always made her feel like she was disappointing him just by breathing. Coffee? She asked, already reaching for a mug. You know what I want. Tommy's smile didn't reach his eyes. I want to know what the hell you were thinking, embarrassing our family like that. Naomi's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Embarrassing our family. Come on, Naomi. Everybody knows Matthew was fooling around, but you didn't have to air our dirty laundry in court. You could have handled this quietly, kept some dignity. The words hit like physical blows. Her own brother, the person who was supposed to have her back no matter what, was more concerned about appearances than her well-being. Dignity. The coffee pot came down harder than necessary. Tommy, he cleaned out our savings account. He maxed out credit cards in my name. He left me with nothing but bills and broken promises. And whose fault is that? Tommy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more violent than shouting. You think I don't know about your spending? The credit cards, the shopping, trying to keep up with the Jones family like we weren't raised to know better. What spending? Naomi's voice cracked with disbelief. Tommy, I bought groceries and school supplies. I paid for Benjamin's baseball equipment and Zoe's dance classes. Everything else went to Matthew's toys, the boat, the motorcycle, the poker games. But Tommy wasn't listening. He'd already decided who was at fault, probably before he'd even walked through the door. Look, I'm not here to judge, he lied smoothly. I'm here to help. Hardware business is good, real good. I could use someone to handle the books, maybe work the register on weekends. It won't pay much, but it's better than this place. He gestured around the diner like it was something shameful, something beneath the Chandler family standards. Never mind that Rosas had fed him for free when their parents worked double shifts at the textile mill. Never mind that this place had given Naomi work when nobody else would hire a woman with no college degree and 2 small children. The pay would be what, exactly? Naomi asked, though she already suspected the answer would insult her. Minimum wage, obviously. Can't show favoritism just because you're family. But here's the thing, there would be conditions. Of course there would be. You'd need to present yourself properly. Professional clothes, professional attitude. No more of this. He waved his hand vaguely at her uniform, her tied-back hair, her bare face that showed every line of exhaustion. And the kids would need to understand that their behavior reflects on the business. Benjamin's been acting out at school, and people talk. Naomi felt something cold settle in her stomach. Benjamin's 12 years old, Tommy. His parents just got divorced. Of course he's struggling. Exactly my point. Kids need structure, discipline. Maybe if you'd been firmer with them instead of trying to be their friend, Matthew wouldn't have. Wouldn't have what? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Wouldn't have cheated. Wouldn't have abandoned his children. Please, finish that sentence. Tommy's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by his younger sister who was supposed to be grateful for his magnanimous offer. Fine, he said, standing abruptly. Stay here, then. Keep serving coffee to truckers and pretending you're too good for honest work. But don't come crying to me when you lose that house and have to move back in with Dad. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Their father, pushing 80 and mean as a snake, had made it clear that Naomi's divorce was proof of everything he'd always believed about her weakness. Moving back to that house would be admitting defeat on every level that mattered. Think about it, Tommy said, softening his tone just enough to make the manipulation obvious. My offer stands until Friday. After that, I'll find someone else. He dropped $1 on the counter for coffee he hadn't touched and walked out, leaving Naomi standing there with her heart hammering against her ribs. Rosa emerged from the kitchen like she'd been waiting for the all-clear signal. What did that pendejo want? To save me from myself, apparently. Naomi's laugh came out broken. Minimum wage and a lecture about proper behavior. Your brother's always been jealous of you, Rosa said matter-of-factly. You got the heart, he got the business sense. Guess which one makes you a better person? But Naomi wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about Benjamin, about the way he'd defended her yesterday at the courthouse. About Zoe, who still asked every night when Daddy was coming home. About the bills stacked on her kitchen counter and the mortgage payment she couldn't make. Tommy's offer was insulting, demeaning, designed to make her feel small and grateful for scraps. But it was also the only lifeline anyone had thrown her. The morning rush started at 6, and for the next 3 hours, Naomi smiled and poured coffee and pretended not to notice the way conversations stopped when she approached tables. She pretended not to see the pitying looks or hear the whispered speculation about how long she'd last before losing everything. But she couldn't pretend not to notice when her phone buzzed with a text from Benjamin's school. Mrs. Walker, Benjamin was involved in an altercation today. Please call the office immediately. Her hands shook as she dialed the number, dreading what she'd find. Mrs. Peterson, the vice principal, answered on the first ring. Mrs. Walker, thank you for calling. Benjamin isn't in serious trouble, but we need to discuss his behavior. He got into a fight with Tyler Chapman during lunch. Janet Chapman's son. Of course. Tyler was saying some very inappropriate things about your family situation. Mrs. Peterson continued carefully. Benjamin defended you quite vigorously. While we understand he's going through a difficult time, we can't allow physical altercations. Naomi closed her eyes, imagining her 12-year-old son throwing punches because some kid was repeating his mother's gossip. The humiliation felt endless, rippling out in waves that touched everyone she loved. I'll be right there, she managed. Actually, Mrs. Walker, there's something else. I've been meaning to call you about Benjamin's lunch account. It's showing a negative balance, and federal guidelines require us to provide alternative meals when. Alternative meals. A peanut butter sandwich and milk, instead of the regular lunch program. It's nothing to be embarrassed about, many families. Naomi hung up the phone before Mrs. Peterson could finish explaining how many families qualified for poverty meals. Her son was eating charity sandwiches because she couldn't afford to put $20 in his lunch account. Rosa appeared at her elbow with a knowing look. Go. I'll cover your tables. Rosa, I can't keep leaving work. Mija, your babies come first. Always. Now go before I throw something at you. The drive to Benjamin's school felt like a march to execution. Every street corner seemed to hold someone who knew her story, someone who was probably discussing her failures over their own family dinners. She found Benjamin sitting in the principal's office with a split lip and defiant eyes that reminded her painfully of Matthew at his worst. But when he saw her, his facade cracked just enough to show the scared little boy underneath. Mom, I'm sorry, but Tyler said you were He glanced at Mrs. Peterson and swallowed the rest of the sentence. He said mean things about you. I couldn't let him. Naomi knelt in front of her son's chair, taking his bruised hands in hers. At 12, he was already trying to be the man of the house, carrying burdens that should never belong to a child. Baby, you don't have to fight my battles, she whispered. That's not your job. Then whose job is it? The question came out raw, honest, devastating. Dad's gone. Uncle Tommy doesn't care. Everybody in this stupid town thinks we're trash now. Who's going to stand up for us if I don't? The words hit her like a physical blow. Her sweet, gentle boy who used to catch spiders and release them outside instead of killing them, who cried when they drove past roadkill, was learning to use his fists because the world had taught him that's what men do when people hurt their families. In that moment, Naomi realized the divorce hadn't just taken her husband. It had stolen her son's childhood, forcing him to grow up too fast in all the wrong ways. We're going to be okay, she told him, the same lie she'd been telling herself. I promise, baby. We're going to figure this out. But as they drove home past the courthouse where her marriage had officially ended, past the hardware store where her brother waited with his conditional salvation, past the diner where she'd spend tomorrow serving coffee to people who whispered about her failure, Naomi wondered if some promises were too big to keep. The lottery ticket was still sitting on her nightstand, forgotten and worthless, just like she felt. She had no idea that in 6 hours, everything was about to change forever. The house felt like a tomb when they returned from the school. Benjamin went straight to his room, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the family photos on the hallway walls. Zoe curled up on the couch with her homework, but Naomi could see her daughter's eyes weren't focusing on the math problems. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, heavy with unspoken fears and uncertain futures. Naomi walked to the kitchen and stared at the stack of bills that seemed to multiply every time she looked away. The mortgage notice sat on top, stamped with red letters that might as well have been written in blood. Final notice. 30 days to pay $2,847.92 or lose the only home her children had ever known. Her phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. Heard your boy got suspended. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Maybe you should teach him some respect before he ends up like his daddy. She deleted it without responding, but the words burrowed under her skin like splinters. Benjamin hadn't been suspended, just given detention and a stern warning, but somehow the truth didn't matter. The story would grow and change as it passed from person to person until Benjamin became a violent delinquent and she became the mother who couldn't control him. The local news played softly on the television, background noise that usually helped fill the emptiness. Tonight, even that felt like mockery. Tonight's lottery drawing features a jackpot that has rolled over 15 times, the anchor announced with practiced enthusiasm. The estimated prize is now $200 million, the largest in Georgia lottery history. Naomi's hand froze halfway to the light switch. The lottery ticket. She'd completely forgotten about it again, lost in the endless cycle of crisis management that had become her life. The ticket sat exactly where she'd left it on her nightstand, wrinkled and insignificant. She picked it up with fingers that trembled from exhaustion rather than excitement. The numbers were barely legible: 07-14-23-31-42, Powerball 18. And tonight's winning numbers are... The anchor's voice drifted from the living room. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and the Powerball is 18. The words hit her consciousness like physical blows, each number registering somewhere deep in her brain where hope lived. She looked down at the ticket, then back at the television screen where the numbers glowed in digital certainty. 07-14-23-31-42, Powerball 18. Identical. The ticket slipped from her nerveless fingers, floating to the carpet like a fallen leaf. For a moment, the world tilted sideways, reality becoming negotiable. This couldn't be happening. People like her didn't win the lottery. People like her got divorced and mocked and left behind with nothing but bills and broken dreams. She knelt and picked up the ticket with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The numbers hadn't changed. They matched perfectly, impossibly, miraculously. $200 million. The thought was too big to fit inside her head. She'd never seen that much money, never imagined what it would look like, feel like, mean. Her entire universe had shrunk to the size of grocery budgets and late fees, and now suddenly it was expanding beyond anything she could comprehend. Mom! Zoe appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over her small shoulders. I finished my homework. Can we have dinner now? Naomi stared at her daughter, this beautiful child who'd been eating generic cereal for breakfast because name brands were a luxury they couldn't afford. Zoe who'd outgrown her winter coat but was making do with layers because new clothes weren't in the budget. Zoe who still asked for a puppy every Christmas, not understanding that pets meant vet bills and food costs they simply didn't have. Mom, are you okay? You look weird. Naomi's voice came out as a whisper. I'm fine, baby. Let's see what we have for dinner. But she wasn't fine. She was holding a piece of paper that would change everything, and she had no idea what that meant. No idea who to tell, who to trust, what to do next. The refrigerator held the last of the milk, 3 eggs, and half a loaf of bread. Tomorrow she'd planned to shop with the tips from her morning shift, stretching every dollar until it screamed. Now, suddenly, money wasn't the problem. Everything else was. Her phone rang, jolting her back to reality. The caller ID showed Matthew's number, and for one insane moment she almost answered, almost shared this impossible news with the man who'd spent 22 years telling her she'd never amount to anything. She let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Tommy this time. Hello. Naomi, I've been thinking about our conversation this morning. Tommy's voice carried the false warmth he used when he wanted something. Maybe I was a little harsh. Family's family, right? How about we discuss terms over dinner tomorrow night? The timing felt surreal. 8 hours ago, she would have been grateful for his condescending charity. Now, holding the winning lottery ticket, his offer felt like an insult wrapped in familial obligation. "I'll have to get back to you," she said carefully. "Don't wait too long. I'm interviewing other candidates Friday morning." She hung up without responding, her mind spinning. The ticket in her hand represented freedom from Tommy's conditions, from Matthew's abandonment, from the whispered judgments of everyone who'd watched her fall. But it also represented something else, a target. The doorbell rang, making her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a man she didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Definitely not from Riverdale. "Mrs. Walker, my name is James Churchill. I'm an attorney from Atlanta. I wonder if I might have a moment of your time." Her blood turned to ice. Somehow, impossibly, someone already knew about the ticket. But that was crazy. The drawing had been less than an hour ago, and she hadn't told anyone. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling," she called through the door. "I'm not selling anything. I represent the Georgia Lottery Corporation. We received a call about a potential winning ticket purchased at the Quick Stop on Highway 27. The store owner mentioned you were in there yesterday, and given the unusual circumstances." Her hand tightened on the ticket. Of course the store owner remembered her, Mrs. Chandler, Tommy's wife's sister, who probably called her sister-in-law the moment she heard about a big winner from their location. In a town like Riverdale, secrets lasted about as long as ice cream in August. "Mrs. Walker, I understand your caution, but time is critical. If you've won tonight's jackpot, there are legal protections we need to put in place immediately. Security measures. The media attention alone could be overwhelming without proper preparation." Benjamin's door opened, and he stepped into the hallway with suspicious eyes. "Mom, who is that? Go back to your room, honey." "But Mom." "Now, Benjamin. Please." The urgency in her voice sent him retreating, but she could feel him listening from behind his barely-closed door. Zoe had migrated to the living room, pretending to watch television but obviously eavesdropping. Naomi opened the door just wide enough to see James Churchill's face clearly. He looked legitimate, expensive suit, professional bearing, business cards from a real law firm. But looks could be deceiving. "How do I know you're really who you say you are?" He handed her a business card and pulled out his phone. "Call the Georgia Lottery headquarters. Ask for Director Patricia Holbrook. Tell her James Churchill is here regarding the Riverdale situation. She'll verify my credentials." The specificity of his answer convinced her more than any identification could have. She dialed the number on his card, and within minutes had confirmed that James Churchill was exactly who he claimed to be. "Mrs. Walker," he said once she'd hung up. "May I come in? What we need to discuss shouldn't happen on your front porch." She led him into the living room, acutely aware of the shabby furniture, the worn carpet, the stack of bills visible on the kitchen counter. James Churchill probably lived in a world where lottery winners were sophisticated people who understood financial instruments and tax implications. She was a divorced waitress who'd just learned her son was eating charity sandwiches at school. "First," James said, settling onto her couch like expensive furniture didn't intimidate him. "Congratulations. If you have tonight's winning ticket, you've just become one of the wealthiest people in Georgia." The words felt unreal, like dialogue from a movie she was watching rather than living. "But before we celebrate," he continued, "we need to discuss what happens next. Mrs. Walker, your life is about to change in ways you can't imagine. Some of those changes will be wonderful. Others won't be." "What do you mean?" James pulled out a tablet and showed her a news article from Florida. "This is Rebecca Martinez, 180 million last year. Within 6 months, she'd been sued by 12 different people claiming they'd contributed to her ticket purchase. Her brother kidnapped her daughter trying to force her to give him money. She had to move 4 times because of death threats." Naomi's stomach dropped. "Death threats? Money changes people, Mrs. Walker. It changes how they see you, how they treat you, what they think they deserve from you. Every relationship you have will be tested. Every kind gesture will be questioned. People you've never met will feel entitled to your story, your choices, your generosity." She thought about Janet Chapman, already spreading gossip about her divorce. About Tommy, calling just hours after the drawing to suddenly reconsider his harsh treatment. About Matthew, who'd texted her twice since the numbers were announced. They didn't even know yet. But somehow, they sensed opportunity. "What do I do?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "First, sign nothing. Trust no one except the team we're going to assemble for you. Second, we need to establish legal protections immediately. Within 24 hours, this news will leak, and your life will become a circus. As if summoned by his words, her phone buzzed with a text from her father. Heard there might be a big lottery winner in town. Family sticks together in good times and bad. Her father, who hadn't spoken to her since the divorce because her failure embarrassed the family name. It's already starting, she whispered, showing James the message. His expression darkened. Mrs. Walker, I need you to understand something. The next few weeks will test everything you believe about human nature. People you trusted will disappoint you. People you never noticed will surprise you. And through it all, you'll have to make decisions that will affect not just you, but your children's entire future. Benjamin appeared in the doorway, no longer pretending he wasn't listening. Mom, what's going on? Who is this guy? She looked at her son, this boy who'd gotten into a fight today defending her honor. This child who was growing up too fast, learning lessons about cruelty and disappointment that no 12-year-old should have to learn. In that moment, she realized the lottery ticket wasn't just about money. It was about choice. For the first time in her adult life, she would have the power to make decisions based on what she wanted rather than what she could afford. The question was, what did she want? Benjamin, Zoe, she said quietly. Come sit down. We need to talk. As her children settled on either side of her, Naomi held up the lottery ticket that would either save them or destroy them. There was no going back now. No pretending this hadn't happened. No returning to the simple certainty of struggling to survive. Kids, she began, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. Our lives are about to change. And I need you both to understand that change isn't always easy, even when it's good. Outside, she could hear cars slowing down as they passed the house. Word was already spreading through Riverdale's gossip network. By morning, everyone would know that Naomi Walker, the divorced failure, the woman they'd all pitied and mocked, had just won more money than the entire town would see in a generation. The real test was just beginning. By 6 a.m. the next morning, Naomi's front yard looked like a crime scene. News vans lined Maple Street like predatory birds, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray Georgia sky. Reporters clutched coffee cups and checked their makeup in car mirrors, waiting for the lottery winner to emerge from her modest 2-story house. Mom, there's a man with a camera looking in my bedroom window, Zoe whispered, her small face pressed against the living room curtains. Naomi's stomach lurched. James Churchill had warned her this would happen, but the reality felt like being trapped inside a fishbowl. Every movement, every shadow behind the curtains, became potential news footage for strangers across the state. Stay away from the windows, baby, she said, pulling her daughter close. Both of you. Benjamin emerged from the kitchen with the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept. I counted 17 cars out there. Mrs. Chapman's on her porch giving interviews. She's telling people she's your best friend. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so nauseating. Janet Chapman, who'd spent yesterday afternoon updating the neighborhood on every humiliating detail of Naomi's divorce, was now positioning herself as the lottery winner's confidant. Her phone had been ringing non-stop since 5 a.m. Matthew called 6 times before she finally blocked his number. Tommy had left 3 voicemails, each one progressively more insistent about family loyalty and shared responsibility. Her father, who hadn't visited since Christmas 2 years ago, was apparently driving down from Augusta with his new girlfriend. But it was the strangers that unsettled her most. People she'd never heard of were calling, claiming to be long-lost relatives, former classmates, family friends who remembered her from decades ago. Each caller had the same breathless urgency, the same manufactured familiarity, the same underlying desperation for connection to sudden wealth. James Churchill arrived at 7:30, somehow navigating through the media circus without being intercepted. He knocked in the pattern they'd agreed on, 3 quick raps, pause, 2 more, and she let him in through the back door. How are you holding up? He asked, though her appearance probably answered his question. She'd been awake all night, alternating between euphoria and terror, unable to reconcile the magnitude of her windfall with the ordinary reality of her breakfast dishes in the sink. The phone won't stop ringing. People I haven't talked to in 20 years are suddenly my dearest friends. She gestured toward the window where a reporter was doing a live broadcast from her driveway. That woman is telling the entire state that I always seemed destined for greatness. James followed her gaze to the perfectly coiffed blonde holding a microphone. Channel 7. Sandra Phillips. She's actually one of the better ones, focuses on human interest rather than speculation. But Mrs. Walker, this is just the beginning. By tonight, there will be national coverage. By tomorrow, international interest. The scope of attention felt suffocating. Naomi had spent her entire life trying to blend in, to not cause trouble, to be the kind of person others overlooked. Now suddenly she was the most interesting thing to happen to Georgia since the Olympics. Have you thought about my suggestions from last night? James continued. About legal representation, financial planning, security measures. She had thought about them, but thinking and deciding were different things. Every choice felt enormous, weighted with consequences she couldn't predict. Trust the wrong person and lose everything. Trust no one and navigate this maze alone. I don't know who to trust, she admitted. Yesterday, I was nobody. Today, everyone wants to be my best friend. How do I tell who's genuine? Something shifted in James's expression, a softness that hadn't been there during his professional presentation the night before. In my experience, the people worth trusting are usually the ones who don't ask for anything. Their conversation was interrupted by aggressive knocking at the front door. Not the gentle pattern James used, but the demanding rhythm of someone accustomed to getting their way. Naomi, open up. It's Tommy. Her brother's voice carried the authority he used at city council meetings, the tone that brooked no argument. Through the peephole, she could see him flanked by two men in expensive suits, one carrying a briefcase, the other a stack of official-looking documents. Lawyers, James murmured, recognizing the type immediately. Your brother's moving fast. Should I let them in? That's your choice. But remember, you don't owe anyone access to your life right now, family or otherwise. Naomi opened the door, and Tommy swept in like he owned the place. The two lawyers followed, their eyes cataloging every detail of her modest home with the calculating precision of appraisers. Naomi, thank God. Tommy embraced her with affection that felt foreign after years of polite distance. I got here as soon as I could. The vultures are already circling. We need to protect you. Protect me from what? From making terrible decisions while you're emotional. He gestured toward James like he was something distasteful. Like trusting strangers who show up at your door with promises they can't keep. James stepped forward with quiet dignity. Mr. Chandler, I presume? I'm James Churchill, representing the Georgia Lottery Corporation's Winner Services Division. I don't care if you're representing the Pope, Tommy shot back. My sister doesn't need some corporate lawyer looking out for lottery interests instead of her interests. The territorial display felt surreal. Yesterday, Tommy had offered her minimum wage and lectures about proper behavior. Today, he was positioning himself as her protector against corporate exploitation. Tommy, what do you want? She asked directly. I want to help you, obviously. This is overwhelming, I get that. But you need family around you right now, people who knew you before all this happened. He gestured toward his companions. This is Robert Hendricks, the best financial attorney in Atlanta. And this is Michael Torres, who handles estate planning for some of the wealthiest families in the South. Both men stepped forward with practiced smiles and business cards printed on expensive paper. Their handshakes lingered just a moment too long. Their eyes held hers with the intensity of salesmen sensing a massive commission. Mrs. Walker, Robert Hendricks began. Your brother has explained your situation. We're prepared to offer comprehensive services, legal protection, tax optimization, investment strategies. Everything you need to turn this windfall into generational wealth. For a very reasonable fee, Michael Torres added smoothly. Family rates, naturally. James cleared his throat. Mrs. Walker, might I suggest you take time to consider all your options before making any commitments? Tommy's face flushed red. Who asked you? Naomi, this man doesn't know you. He doesn't care about your children's future or your family's legacy. He cares about his commission from the Lottery Corporation. Actually, James said quietly, I'm salaried. I don't receive commissions. The distinction seemed to irritate Tommy further. Look, Naomi, we don't have time for corporate bureaucracy. Every hour you delay, you're losing money to taxes, inflation. Missed opportunities. These gentlemen have already prepared preliminary documentation. Documentation for what? Naomi interrupted. Robert Hendricks opened his briefcase with theatrical precision. A family trust structure that protects your assets while ensuring your children's security. Your brother would serve as co-trustee, naturally, given his business experience and family connection. Co-trustee, meaning Tommy would have control over her money. I'd need to review any documents thoroughly, James interjected. As would any independent counsel Mrs. Walker chooses to consult. Independent counsel. Tommy laughed, but it sounded forced. She's got family counsel right here. People who love her, who've known her since she was born. What could be more independent than that? Naomi looked between the two camps forming in her living room, her brother with his expensive lawyers promising protection, and James Churchill with his quiet competence and lack of financial motive. Both claimed to have her best interests at heart. Both probably believed they were telling the truth. But only one of them had known her yesterday, when she was worth protecting for reasons that had nothing to do with money. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your win. I'm Sarah Mitchell from People magazine. We'd love to feature your inspiring story. Single mother overcomes adversity through lottery luck. Very interested in exclusive rights. Can we talk?" Then another. "Mrs. Walker, this is Detective Ray Foster with Riverdale PD. We've had reports of suspicious individuals in your neighborhood. Might want to discuss security precautions." And another. "Naomi, it's Jessica from high school. Heard your amazing news. I'm planning my wedding and wondered if you'd consider helping with costs. We were always such good friends." Jessica from high school. Naomi vaguely remembered a girl who'd bullied her about her thrift store clothes and never spoken to her after graduation. "The phone calls are just going to get worse," James said gently, watching her scroll through the messages. "We should discuss changing your number, setting up screening protocols." "Or," Tommy interjected, "we could handle all that for you. Robert's firm has excellent support staff, private investigators, security consultants. They can filter out the noise so you can focus on important decisions. Like signing papers that made Tommy co-trustee of her fortune." Through the window, she could see more news vans arriving. A helicopter circled overhead, probably getting aerial footage of her house for the evening news. Neighbors she'd lived beside for years stood in their yards giving interviews, sharing carefully edited memories of this sweet, struggling single mother who'd always been destined for something special. Mrs. Henderson, who'd called the police when Benjamin's basketball accidentally hit her car. The Johnsons, who'd complained to the Homeowners Association about her unkempt yard. The Murphys, who'd ignored her Christmas cookies for the past 3 years. All of them were suddenly experts on her character, her worthiness, her inspiring journey. "I need to think," Naomi said finally. "This is all happening so fast." "That's exactly why you need guidance," Tommy pressed. "Naomi, you're a waitress. No offense, but you don't understand high-level finance, tax implications, legal structures. This money could disappear as fast as it appeared if you make the wrong choices." The casual cruelty of his words, "you're a waitress," hung in the air like smoke. As if her years of hard work, of supporting her family, of keeping them fed and housed through Matthew's irresponsibility, meant nothing. As if intelligence was measured only in zeros on a bank statement. James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Walker has excellent instincts. I'd trust her judgment over many clients with advanced degrees." It was the first time in years that someone had defended her competence rather than her need for protection. "Look," Tommy said, sensing he was losing ground, "at least let Robert explain the trust structure. Knowledge doesn't commit you to anything." But even as Robert Hendricks opened his folder of documents, Naomi's attention was drawn to the window. A black sedan with tinted windows had pulled up across the street, its occupants invisible behind dark glass. It wasn't a news van or a neighbor's car. It looked official, governmental, vaguely threatening. "James," she said quietly, "who else knows about the ticket?" He followed her gaze to the sedan. "Officially, the Lottery Corporation, your family attorney if you choose one, the IRS once we file the claim." "Why?" "That car. It's been there for 20 minutes, but no one's gotten out." James's expression sharpened. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in low tones while keeping his eyes on the mysterious vehicle. "We may have a problem," he said after hanging up. "That's not law enforcement, not federal agents, not anyone who should legitimately be conducting surveillance." Tommy scoffed. "You're being paranoid. It's probably another reporter." But as if summoned by their attention, the sedan's doors opened. 2 men in dark suits emerged, moving with the purposeful stride of people accustomed to intimidation. They crossed the street directly toward Naomi's house, ignoring the reporters who called out questions. "Mrs. Walker," the older man said when she opened the door, "I'm Vincent Crawford from Crawford Financial Services. We represent several high-net-worth individuals who prefer to keep their business arrangements private. We'd like to discuss a proposition that could be very beneficial for everyone involved." He handed her a business card made of thick, expensive stock. No corporate logo, Just a name and phone number in elegant font. I'm not interested in. Mrs. Walker, you may not realize how vulnerable your situation has become. Large lottery winners often face challenges from people who feel entitled to share in their good fortune. We provide comprehensive protection services for individuals who value their privacy and security. The way he said challenges sent ice through her veins. Behind him, his younger companion was photographing her house, her yard, probably her license plate. What kind of protection? She asked, though every instinct screamed at her to slam the door. Complete financial anonymity. Asset protection that even court orders can't penetrate. Personal security that ensures your family's safety regardless of external threats. For a fee, I assume. Vincent Crawford smiled, and it reminded Naomi of the way cats smiled at mice. Our fee structure is quite reasonable. 40% of assets under management, plus operational costs. In exchange, you gain complete freedom from the burdens of wealth management. 40%. He wanted 40% of her lottery winnings in exchange for making her problems disappear. That's robbery, Tommy said from behind her. That's security, Crawford corrected smoothly. Mrs. Walker, in the next few weeks you're going to discover that everyone wants something from you. Old friends, distant relatives, strangers who feel your luck somehow belongs to them. We can make all of that go away. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Pay us, or deal with problems we might not be able to help you solve later. James stepped into view, and something shifted in Crawford's expression. Recognition, maybe. Or concern. Mr. Churchill, Crawford said with forced pleasantness. Still playing white knight for lottery winners. Still playing predator. James replied evenly. The tension between them felt electric, loaded with history Naomi didn't understand. But she understood enough to know that James Churchill had made enemies protecting people like her. Crawford's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. Mrs. Walker, I'll leave my card. When the situation becomes untenable, and it will, call us. We'll be ready to help. He and his companion walked back to their sedan with unhurried confidence. The message was clear, this isn't over. Who were those men? Naomi asked once they'd driven away. Parasites, James said grimly. They target lottery winners, promise protection from problems they usually create themselves. If you don't hire them, sudden problems appear. Lawsuits, harassment, mysterious accidents. You're scaring her, Tommy protested. Good. She should be scared. This much money makes people dangerous. As if to prove his point, Naomi's phone rang. Matthew's name appeared on the screen despite being blocked. He'd probably gotten a new number. Answer it, James suggested. But put it on speaker. You need to hear what you're dealing with. She accepted the call with trembling fingers. Naomi, thank God you answered. Baby, I've been trying to reach you all morning. Baby. He hadn't called her that in years, not since the divorce proceedings started. What do you want, Matthew? I want to apologize. For everything. The divorce, the way I treated you, abandoning the kids. I was stupid, Naomi. Scared and stupid and completely wrong about everything that mattered. His voice carried a vulnerability she remembered from their early years together, when he'd been young and uncertain and genuinely seemed to love her. I know you have no reason to trust me, he continued. But I want to make things right. For you, for Benjamin and Zoe. I want us to be a family again. The words she'd dreamed of hearing for years, finally spoken. But now they felt hollow, timed too perfectly to be coincidental. Matthew, the divorce was finalized yesterday. Paperwork can be undone. We can fix this, Naomi. Start over, do it right this time. I learned my lesson. I know what really matters now. Yes, she thought bitterly. $200 million is what really matters now. I need time to think, she said. Of course, baby. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere this time. After she hung up, the room felt suffocating. Her brother wanted control of her money. Strangers wanted to exploit her vulnerability. Her ex-husband wanted to reconcile now that she was worth something. Everyone had solutions that required her to trust them with her future. Everyone except James Churchill, who'd asked for nothing and offered only honest counsel. James, she said quietly, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to help me disappear. The safe house James arranged sat 40 miles outside Riverdale, hidden behind a grove of pine trees that blocked it from the main road. It was supposed to be temporary. Just long enough to claim the lottery prize without media interference and establish proper security protocols. That was 3 days ago. Now, sitting in the sterile rental house with her children, Naomi felt like a prisoner of her own good fortune. Benjamin and Zoe had missed school, cut off from their friends and routines. She'd called in sick to Rosa's diner, probably losing the only job that had ever felt like more than survival. "Mom, when can we go home?" Zoe asked for the 10th time that morning, her 8-year-old patience exhausted. "I miss my room. I miss my stuffed animals." "Soon, baby," Naomi replied, though she had no idea what soon meant anymore. James had been handling everything, coordinating with lottery officials, scheduling the prize claim ceremony, arranging legal representation. He called twice daily with updates that somehow revealed nothing about when this isolation would end. Her phone, now changed to an unlisted number, buzzed with a text from him. Meeting with lottery officials ran long. "We'll call tonight with updates. Don't answer door for anyone except me." The same message, essentially, that he'd sent yesterday and the day before. Benjamin emerged from his makeshift bedroom, holding his phone with frustrated anger. "Mom, Tyler Chapman posted a video on TikTok. He's telling everyone I'm hiding because I'm scared to face him after our fight. Honey, what people say online doesn't. He's showing pictures of our house with all the news trucks. He's making it look like we ran away because we're ashamed or something." Benjamin's voice cracked with the particular misery of 12-year-old humiliation. "Everyone at school thinks we're cowards." Naomi pulled him close, feeling the rigid tension in his shoulders. Her son, who'd fought to defend her honor just days ago, was now being painted as a child who fled from consequences. "When we go back," she said carefully, "things will be different. We'll have resources now. Opportunities." "Will they?" Benjamin pulled away, his eyes too old for his face. "Or will everyone just hate us for having money they don't have?" The question cut deeper than she wanted to admit. In 3 days of isolation, she'd started to understand that winning the lottery wasn't just about gaining wealth, it was about losing her place in the world she'd known. Her laptop, connected to the rental house's Wi-Fi, showed her the local news coverage that continued despite her absence. Channel 7's Sandra Phillips had done a follow-up story titled "Mystery Surrounds Missing Lottery Winner." The report featured interviews with neighbors, co-workers, and family members, all expressing concern for Naomi's welfare. Matthew had given a particularly emotional interview outside their former home. "I just want Naomi to know that she doesn't have to hide from me," he'd said, eyes glistening with what looked like genuine tears. "Whatever mistakes I made, we can work through them. Our family can be whole again." The performance was flawless, the contrite ex-husband desperate to reunite with the woman he'd wronged. Viewers who didn't know him would see a man broken by love and regret. Naomi saw something else, the calculating intelligence that had convinced her to co-sign loans she couldn't afford, to put her name on credit cards he'd maxed out, to believe his promises while he systematically prepared to leave her with nothing. Tommy had been more subtle in his media appearances, positioning himself as the concerned brother worried about his sister's emotional state and vulnerability to exploitation. He spoke in measured tones about family responsibility and the importance of protecting Naomi from opportunists who might take advantage of her generous nature. What he didn't mention was the 3 messages he'd left on her new number, each one more insistent about the urgency of establishing the family trust. Each one ending with variations of time-sensitive opportunities and windows closing rapidly. The isolation was supposed to protect her from exactly this kind of pressure. So why did she feel more trapped than ever? Her laptop chimed with an incoming video call. James Churchill's name appeared on the screen, his familiar face a welcome sight after 3 days of enforced solitude. "Naomi, how are you holding up?" "We're managing," she lied. "The kids are getting restless, but we're okay." James nodded sympathetically. "I know this is difficult, but I have good news. We've scheduled the official prize claim for tomorrow morning. Once that's done, we can start the process of getting your life back to normal." Normal. The word felt foreign. What does normal look like when you're worth $200 million? Different for everyone. But the important thing is that you'll have choices. Real choices, not survival decisions. Something in his tone felt off, too practiced, like he'd given this speech before. For the first time, Naomi really looked at James Churchill on her screen. The expensive suit that fit too perfectly for someone on a government salary. The watch that caught the light like precious metal. The background behind him that looked more like a luxury hotel than a lottery office. "James, where are you calling from?" "The lottery headquarters in Atlanta." "Why?" but the background didn't look like any government building she'd ever seen. It looked like wealth, old money, inherited power, the kind of refined luxury that came from generations of privilege. Can you show me around? I'd like to see where my prize claim will happen. James hesitated for just a moment, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The building's in lockdown due to security concerns around your case. But tomorrow you'll see everything. Her laptop chimed with another incoming call. Unknown number, which usually meant a reporter or stranger seeking money. But something made her accept it. Rosa Martinez appeared on the screen, her weathered face tight with worry. Mija, thank God you answered. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. Rosa, how did you get this number? Never mind that. Listen to me carefully. Something's wrong. Very wrong. Naomi glanced at James, who was watching the conversation with obvious discomfort. Rosa, I'm in a meeting. No, you listen. That man, the one who came to your house the night you won? James Churchill. What about him? I have a cousin who works for the Georgia Lottery. Real lottery, not some fake company. She's been there 15 years. There is no James Churchill in their winner services division. There never has been. The words hit Naomi like physical blows. She stared at James on her screen, watching his expression shift from concern to something colder, more calculating. Rosa, you must be mistaken. I'm not mistaken about anything, Mija. And there's more. The safe house address you gave me? I had my nephew drive by. There's no rental property there. The address leads to a private estate owned by Crawford Financial Services. Crawford Financial. The men who'd approached her with their 40% protection offer. James was typing rapidly on his phone, probably ending their video call. But Naomi was faster. Don't you dare hang up, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Who are you? Who are you really? James's mask slipped completely, revealing something predatory underneath. Naomi, you're being fed false information by people who want to undermine your security. Security. She laughed, but it came out harsh and broken. You've isolated me from everyone I know. You've convinced me to trust only you. You've positioned yourself as my only protection against people who want to exploit me. Because I am protecting you. You are the people who want to exploit me. The realization crashed over her like a wave. James Churchill wasn't from the Lottery Corporation. He worked for Crawford Financial, or something like it. The safe house was their property. The legal protections he'd promised were probably designed to transfer her assets to accounts they controlled. Every conversation, every piece of advice, every warning about trusting the wrong people, it had all been manipulation, carefully designed to isolate her from legitimate help. Rosa, she said, keeping her eyes on James's increasingly desperate expression, call the police. Real police, not anyone who might be working with these people. Already done, Mija. They're on their way. James's video feed cut out abruptly, but not before she saw him making urgent phone calls. Within minutes, she heard vehicles approaching the house. Mom! Benjamin appeared in the doorway, his face pale. There are cars coming. A lot of cars. Naomi looked out the window and felt her blood turn to ice. 3 black SUVs were coming up the driveway, moving fast. These weren't police vehicles. Kids, get in the bathroom. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you. Mom, what's happening? Zoe's voice was high with fear. Just do what I say. Now! She heard them run down the hallway, heard the bathroom door slam and the lock click. Then she grabbed her phone and called 911. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Naomi Walker. I'm being held against my will at a property owned by Crawford Financial Services. My children are with me. We need immediate police assistance. The operator's voice was calm, professional. Can you give me your location? But before she could answer, the front door exploded inward. Vincent Crawford walked in like he owned the place, which, apparently, he did. Mrs. Walker, I'm disappointed. We had such a promising arrangement developing. Behind him came James Churchill, no longer bothering with his concerned government employee persona. 2 other men flanked them, both carrying weapons they weren't trying to hide. Where's the lottery ticket? Crawford asked conversationally. I already claimed the prize. No, you didn't. The real lottery office has no record of your claim. The ticket is still unclaimed, which means it's still transferable. The scope of their deception was staggering. Everything James had told her about claiming procedures, legal protections, media protocols, all lies designed to keep her isolated while they figured out how to steal her winning ticket. You can't just take it, she said, though her voice sounded weak even to herself. Actually, we can. You're going to sign papers transferring the ticket to a trust we've established. For your children's protection, of course. You'll retain a comfortable living allowance, say, 1% of the winnings annually. $2 million a year should be sufficient for someone of your background. $2 million that they would control, dispersed at their discretion, ensuring her permanent dependence on their generosity. And if I refuse? Crawford's smile held no warmth whatsoever. Well, terrible things happen to single mothers who can't protect their children. House fires, car accidents, random violence in small towns where police response times can be delayed. The threat to her children made everything else irrelevant. Money, pride, justice, none of it mattered compared to Benjamin and Zoe's safety. The ticket's in my purse, she said quietly. Excellent. James, if you would. But as James reached for her purse, sirens became audible in the distance. Real sirens, growing louder. Crawford's expression darkened. You called the police. Of course I called the police. That was unwise. Crawford pulled out his phone and made a quick call. We have a complication. Yes, implement the backup plan. All of it. He hung up and looked at Naomi with something like pity. Mrs. Walker, you could have lived very comfortably on $2 million a year. Now, I'm afraid, you'll be lucky to live at all. The sirens were getting closer, but Crawford and his men showed no signs of fleeing. In fact, they seemed almost pleased by the approaching law enforcement. That's when Naomi realized the most devastating truth of all. The police coming to rescue her might not be police at all. In a town like Riverdale, where Crawford Financial had probably been operating for years, where 40% of $200 million could buy cooperation from anyone who mattered, who could she really trust? Her phone rang. Matthew's number. Answer it, Crawford ordered. Put it on speaker. She obeyed, her hands shaking. Naomi? Baby, thank God. I've been so worried. Matthew, Listen to me carefully. The police are on their way to bring you home. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. The men who took you, they are not legitimate. But you're going to be safe now. Crawford was smiling. Matthew was part of this too. Her ex-husband, who'd called her worthless for 22 years, was now playing concerned hero in their elaborate theft. How long have you been working with them? She asked. Working with who? Naomi, you're not making sense. You've been through trauma. When you get home, we'll get you the help you need. Help. Medical intervention for the unstable lottery winner who was making wild accusations against respected businessman Vincent Crawford and concerned ex-husband Matthew Walker. They'd thought of everything. The sirens stopped outside. Through the window, she could see squad cars and what looked like legitimate police officers. But how could she tell? How could she know which authorities were real and which were bought? Mrs. Walker, one of the officers called through a bullhorn. This is Riverdale Police. We're here to escort you home safely. Riverdale Police. Crawford's people, almost certainly. In the bathroom, she could hear Zoe crying. Benjamin was trying to comfort his sister, his young voice promising her that everything would be okay. But everything was not okay. Everything was falling apart in ways she'd never imagined possible. Crawford was still smiling when the police knocked on the front door. Shall we let them in? I think you'll find they are very concerned about your well-being. As the door opened and uniformed officers entered to rescue her, Naomi realized that winning the lottery hadn't freed her from anything. It had simply revealed that the cage she'd been living in was much larger and much more sophisticated than she'd ever understood. And now, with her children trapped beside her, she was about to discover just how far these people would go to claim what they believed was theirs. The ride back to Riverdale felt like a funeral procession. Naomi sat in the back of the police cruiser with Benjamin and Zoe pressed against her sides, watching the familiar landscape pass by like scenes from a life she'd never live again. Officer Bradley Hutchins, who'd arrested her high school boyfriend for underage drinking 15 years ago, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror with what she'd once thought was concern. Now she wondered what Crawford Financial was paying him to deliver her safely into their web. Mrs. Walker, he said in the gentle tone reserved for trauma victims, I want you to know that everyone in town's been worried sick. Your disappearance really shook people up. Disappearance. As if she'd vanished voluntarily rather than been systematically isolated and deceived. Where exactly are you taking us? She asked. Home, of course. Your house on Maple Street. Matthew is waiting for you there. Of course he was. The loving ex-husband, probably surrounded by concerned neighbors and sympathetic friends, all ready to help poor, confused Naomi understand how her traumatic experience had clouded her judgment. The media circus had only grown in her absence. News vans lined the street like a military convoy, and reporters pressed against police barriers that hadn't been there. 3 days ago, someone had organized this spectacle, turned her return into a public event that would be impossible to escape unnoticed. As they pulled into her driveway, Naomi saw Matthew standing on the front porch with an expression of such relief and love that even she almost believed it. He'd always been good at performing emotion when it served his purposes. "Daddy!" Zoe broke free from Naomi's arms and ran to Matthew the moment they got out of the cruiser. He swept her up in an embrace that looked genuinely tender, and for a moment Naomi felt the old confusion that had kept her trapped in their marriage for so long. Maybe Matthew really had changed. Maybe the money had shocked him into realizing what he'd thrown away. Maybe. Then she saw Vincent Crawford standing in her living room, visible through the open front door, and remembered that nothing about this situation was genuine. "Naomi." Matthew approached her slowly, like she might bolt. "Thank God you're safe. When you disappeared, I thought I'd lost you forever." The reporters were recording everything, turning their private moment into public theater. Matthew seemed aware of the cameras, his gestures just slightly too broad, his voice carrying just far enough for the microphones to catch. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Of course. Inside. Away from all this chaos." But inside wasn't away from chaos, it was the center of it. Her living room had been transformed into a command center. Crawford and his associates occupied her couch like they belonged there. Tommy sat at her kitchen table with his lawyers, papers spread out like battle plans. Even Janet Chapman was there, hovering near the window with the proprietary air of someone granted insider access. "Naomi." Janet rushed forward with theatrical concern. "Oh, honey, we've all been so worried. When you vanished without a word, we thought something terrible had happened." "Something terrible did happen," Naomi replied, her eyes fixed on Crawford. "You're confused, understandably," Crawford said smoothly. "Trauma can affect memory, perception. What you think happened and what actually happened aren't always the same thing." He was doing it again, making her question her own reality, her own experience. Gaslighting with the confident authority of someone who'd never been challenged. "James Churchill isn't a lottery official," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He works for you. The safe house is your property. Everything he told me was a lie designed to isolate me from legitimate help." The room fell silent except for the soft whir of cameras from the reporters gathered outside her windows. "Naomi," Tommy said gently, "you're not thinking clearly. James Churchill is exactly who he said he was. I verified his credentials myself." "You verified fake credentials." "Honey," Matthew interrupted, "you've been under incredible stress. The divorce, the lottery win, the media attention, it's enough to break anyone. That's why I called Dr. Patricia Holbrook." A woman in her 50s stepped forward from the corner where she'd been quietly observing. Professional blazer, kind eyes, the bearing of someone accustomed to helping people through crisis. "Mrs. Walker, I'm Dr. Holbrook, a psychiatrist who specializes in adjustment disorders related to sudden wealth. Your family asked me to evaluate your mental state." The trap was closing with surgical precision. A mental health evaluation that would declare her unfit to make financial decisions. Legal guardianship that would transfer control of her lottery winnings to responsible family members. All documented, all legitimate, all completely legal. "I don't consent to any evaluation," Naomi said. "In Georgia," Dr. Holbrook replied gently, "family members can petition for emergency psychiatric holds when someone poses a danger to themselves or others. Your disappearance with your children, your accusations against respected community members, your apparent paranoid delusions, they constitute grounds for temporary intervention." Benjamin stepped closer to her, his young face hard with protective fury. "My mom isn't crazy. She's the sanest person I know." "Of course she is, honey," Dr. Holbrook said with practiced kindness. "But sometimes trauma makes even the strongest people see threats that aren't really there." "The threats are real," Naomi insisted. "Crawford Financial Services has been systematically—" "Mrs. Walker," Crawford interrupted with infinite patience, "you keep mentioning this Crawford Financial Services. Could you show me any documentation of our supposed interactions? Any contracts, business cards, anything that proves what you're claiming?" The business card he'd given her was back at the safe house. His safe house, where his people had controlled every piece of evidence. The phone numbers James had provided would probably be disconnected or lead to fake companies. Any proof of their deception had been carefully eliminated. "You know I don't have proof," she said. "You made sure of that." Crawford's expression was perfectly sympathetic. "Mrs. Walker, I understand you're going through something traumatic. Sudden wealth can trigger all kinds of psychological responses: paranoia, delusions of persecution, an inability to trust even the people who love you most." He gestured toward Matthew, toward Tommy, toward the assembled group of family and professionals who'd gathered to help her through this difficult time. "What I'm suggesting," Crawford continued, "is that we work together to get you the support you need. Professional financial management, therapeutic intervention, family structure that protects both you and your children. For 40% of my winnings." Crawford looked genuinely puzzled. 40%? Mrs. Walker, where would you get that number? Standard wealth management fees are typically 1 to 2% annually. Even his theft had been rewritten, made reasonable, documented in ways that would stand up to legal scrutiny. Zoe tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, why is everyone being so weird? Why won't they just let us go home?" "We are home, baby," Matthew said, kneeling down to her level. "This is home. With Daddy and Mommy and Benjamin, all together like we used to be." "But you don't live here anymore," Zoe said with 8-year-old logic. "You live with the lady with the yellow hair." Matthew's girlfriend. He'd forgotten about her in his rush to reclaim his family. Or maybe she'd been paid to disappear temporarily while he played the role of devoted father. "That's over, sweetheart," Matthew said smoothly. "Daddy made mistakes, but families forgive each other. That's what love means." The manipulation was masterful. Using her children's need for stability, their confusion about the divorce, their desire for their family to be whole again. Every word calculated to make her seem like the obstacle to their happiness. "Mrs. Walker," Dr. Holbrook said, "I'd like to speak with you privately. Just a brief conversation to assess your current state of mind. And if I refuse, then I'll have to recommend an involuntary psychiatric hold. For your own protection and the protection of your children." The children she'd fought so hard to keep safe were now being used as weapons against her. Refuse the evaluation and lose custody. Submit to the evaluation and be declared mentally incompetent. Either choice led to the same destination: Crawford and his associates gaining control of her money while she was rendered powerless to stop them. "Fine," she said. "But I want Tommy present as a witness." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Dr. Holbrook replied. "Psychiatric evaluations require privacy to be effective." Of course they did. No witnesses to whatever leading questions or manipulative techniques would be used to build a case for her instability. "Mom," Benjamin whispered, "don't let them separate us." The plea broke something inside her chest. Her 12-year-old son understood what was happening better than most of the adults in the room. He could see the trap closing, feel the walls narrowing around their family. "I need to use the bathroom first," Naomi said. "Of course," Dr. Holbrook agreed. "Take your time." Naomi walked to the hallway bathroom, the same one where her children had hidden 3 days ago when Crawford's men first invaded their lives. She locked the door and pulled out her phone, hands shaking as she dialed Rosa's number. "Mija, thank God. Are you safe?" "No. Rosa, listen carefully. They've set up a psychiatric evaluation. If I'm declared mentally incompetent, they'll get control of everything. I need you to do something for me." "Anything. The lottery ticket is in my purse, which is probably still at Crawford's safe house. But I made copies before I left. There's one hidden in Benjamin's school backpack, inside his math textbook. Another one taped under my car's dashboard. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. Rosa, if something happens to me, those copies prove I won. Don't let them claim I lost the original ticket. Don't let them steal my children's future." Through the bathroom door, she could hear Dr. Holbrook explaining to the family how these evaluations worked, how important it was to provide honest answers about Naomi's recent behavior. "There's more," Naomi whispered. "Matthew never stopped the divorce proceedings. He just delayed them. If I'm declared incompetent, he can claim spousal rights to lottery winnings as my legal guardian. He gets the money and the kids. That bastard. Promise me, Rosa. Promise me you'll protect Benjamin and Zoe if I can't." "You're scaring me, Mija." "Good. Be scared. These people are capable of anything." A knock on the bathroom door interrupted them. "Mrs. Walker, are you all right in there?" "Just a minute," she called, then whispered into the phone. "I love you, Rosa. Thank you for everything." She hung up and flushed the toilet for authenticity, then opened the door to find Dr. Holbrook waiting with patient concern. "Ready?" the psychiatrist asked. Naomi looked past her to the living room where her children sat with their father, surrounded by people who claimed to have their best interests at heart. Benjamin was watching her with eyes too old for his face, understanding that whatever happened next would determine their entire future. "Ready," she lied. The evaluation took place in her own bedroom, the space where she'd planned Benjamin's birthday parties and nursed Zoe through countless childhood illnesses. Dr. Holbrook sat in the chair by the window, clipboard balanced on her knee, while Naomi perched on the edge of the bed like a stranger in her own life. "Let's start with some basic questions," Dr. Holbrook said kindly. "How have you been sleeping since your lottery win?" Loaded question. Admit to insomnia and appear unstable. Claim to be sleeping well and seem disconnected from the magnitude of life changes. "I've been having trouble sleeping," Naomi answered honestly. "And your appetite?" "I haven't been eating much." Dr. Holbrook made notes. "Have you been experiencing any unusual thoughts? Paranoid ideation? Feelings that people are plotting against you?" "People are plotting against me." "Can you give me specific examples?" Naomi described Crawford's initial approach, the fake lottery official, the isolation at the safe house. With every detail, Dr. Holbrook's expression grew more concerned, her notes more extensive. "Mrs. Walker, these experiences you're describing, have you considered that your perception might have been altered by stress? That what seemed like deception might have been legitimate attempts to help you?" "No, because I'm not crazy." "Of course not. But trauma can affect anyone's ability to process information accurately. Even very intelligent, very stable people can develop temporary paranoid thinking when overwhelmed." The evaluation continued for 30 minutes, each question designed to establish a pattern of delusion, paranoia, and impaired judgment. By the time it ended, Naomi felt like she'd been systematically dismantled, her every response twisted into evidence of mental instability. "Thank you for your honesty," Dr. Holbrook said, closing her notepad. "I know this wasn't easy. What's your recommendation?" Dr. Holbrook's smile was professionally sympathetic. "I believe you're experiencing a severe adjustment disorder with paranoid features. You need intensive therapy, medication management, and temporary relief from financial decision-making responsibilities." "Temporary. Until you've recovered from this traumatic episode. With proper treatment, most people in your situation improve significantly within 6 to 12 months. 6 to 12 months during which Crawford and his associates would have complete control of her lottery winnings. By the time she was declared mentally competent again, there might be nothing left to reclaim." They returned to the living room where the family waited with barely concealed anticipation. Crawford's expression was perfectly neutral, but she caught a flash of satisfaction in his eyes. "Well?" Tommy asked. "I'm recommending a temporary conservatorship," Dr. Holbrook announced. "Mrs. Walker needs professional support while she recovers from this psychological crisis." Matthew stepped forward with theatrical relief. "Thank God. Naomi, I know this feels overwhelming, but we're going to take care of everything. You don't have to worry about anything except getting better." "What about my children?" "They'll stay with me, obviously. In their family home, with their father who loves them." Benjamin stood up abruptly. "I'm not staying with you. You left us. You don't get to come back just because Mom has money now." "Son, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Benjamin's voice cracked with fury and pain. "You told Mom she was worthless. You made her cry every night for months. You left us for some woman who's younger than your car. Now you want us back because Mom won the lottery." The room fell silent. Even the reporters outside seemed to pause their chatter. "Benjamin," Matthew said carefully, "you're upset. You've been through a lot. But I'm still your father." "Being a father is more than DNA," Benjamin shot back. "It's about showing up. It's about protecting your family. It's about not abandoning people when things get hard." Out of the mouths of babes. Her 12-year-old son had articulated what all the adults in the room were pretending not to understand. Crawford cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should let the family process this privately. Mrs. Walker, if you'll sign these temporary conservatorship papers, we can begin implementing protective measures immediately." He produced a folder of documents, each page marked with yellow sticky notes indicating where she should sign. Her entire future reduced to signature lines and legal jargon. "What if I refuse to sign?" "Then Dr. Holbrook will petition the court for an involuntary conservatorship. The hearing would be public, potentially traumatic for your children, and the outcome would be the same. Sign voluntarily and maintain the illusion of choice, or be declared incompetent through legal proceedings that would destroy what remained of her dignity. Tommy approached with his own set of papers. Naomi, I've also prepared family trust documents. For the kids' protection. If something were to happen to you. Nothing's going to happen to me. Of course not. But lottery winners face unique risks. Kidnapping, extortion, violence from people who think they deserve a share of the money. This trust ensures Benjamin and Zoe are protected regardless of circumstances. More signatures, more legal structures designed to separate her from her winnings. Death benefits that would flow to trustees rather than her children. Asset protection that protected assets from her. I need time to read these. Time is a luxury we don't have, Crawford interrupted. Every hour your financial situation remains unprotected, you're vulnerable to lawsuits, claims, seizure orders. Sign now, and we can begin safeguarding your children's inheritance immediately. Zoe climbed onto her lap, small arms wrapping around her neck. Mommy, I'm scared. Everyone's being mean to you. The simple truth from an 8-year-old cut through all the professional manipulation and false concern. Everyone was being mean to her, systematically destroying her autonomy while claiming to act in her best interests. It's going to be okay, baby, she whispered, though she no longer believed her own words. Crawford placed a pen in her hand. For your children, Mrs. Walker. Everything we're doing is for your children. As Naomi stared at the documents that would sign away her freedom, her fortune, and her future, she realized she'd already lost the only battle that mattered. Her children would be safe. Fed, housed, educated, protected from the poverty that had defined her own childhood. But they would also learn that money mattered more than love, that manipulation was more powerful than truth, that the people who claimed to protect you were often the ones you needed protection from. She signed the papers with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else, watching her signature seal their fate. Outside, the sun was setting over Riverdale, casting long shadows across the yard where she'd once believed her children would grow up safe and happy. That dream, like so many others, was ending with the stroke of a pen. The ink was still wet on the conservatorship papers when Crawford's phone rang. He answered with the casual authority of someone who'd just completed a successful business transaction. Yes. I see. How long ago? Understood. His expression shifted subtly as he listened, the satisfied smugness replaced by something harder, more urgent. Mrs. Walker, he said after hanging up, it seems we have a complication. The real lottery headquarters has issued a fraud alert. Someone's been impersonating their officials. The words hung in the air like smoke. Even Tommy looked confused, his lawyers exchanging uncertain glances. What kind of fraud alert? Matthew asked. The kind that suggests Mrs. Walker may have been the victim of an elaborate scam. Crawford's voice carried just the right note of concern. There are reports of fake lottery officials, fraudulent safe houses, even forged documentation designed to steal winning tickets from vulnerable winners. The performance was masterful. Crawford was repositioning himself as the hero of the story, the legitimate businessman who'd discovered the deception just in time to protect poor, confused Naomi from real criminals. That's impossible, Dr. Holbrook said. I verified Mr. Churchill's credentials myself. With whom? Crawford asked smoothly. The real lottery headquarters has no record of your inquiry. Naomi watched the elaborate theater unfold with growing understanding. This was the endgame, Crawford establishing himself as her savior while simultaneously validating her paranoid delusions about being deceived. She'd been right about the conspiracy, but wrong about who was behind it. Except she hadn't been wrong. She was watching the conspiracy adapt in real time, creating new narratives to explain away inconvenient facts. Mrs. Walker, Crawford continued, I believe you may have been manipulated by sophisticated criminals who specialize in lottery fraud. The good news is that we can protect you from further exploitation. The conservatorship papers I just signed remain valid and necessary. In fact, they are more important now than ever. Until we can determine the full extent of this fraud, you need legitimate protection from anyone who might try to take advantage of your situation. Benjamin stood up abruptly. This is all bull. He caught himself before completing the curse. This is all garbage. Mom was right about everything, and now you're just changing the story. Benjamin, son, Matthew said with false patience, adults are trying to protect your mother. Adults are trying to steal from my mother. Benjamin's voice carried a clarity that cut through all the professional doublespeak. And you're helping them because you want the money too. That's enough, Tommy snapped. Benjamin, apologize to your father right now. For what? Telling the truth. The tension in the room was electric. Her 12-year-old son was the only person present willing to name what everyone else was pretending not to see. Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Emergency. Meet me at Rosa's diner. Come alone. Trust no one else. A friend. She showed the message to Crawford, who frowned with apparent concern. Mrs. Walker, given recent events, I strongly advise against meeting unknown contacts. This could be another attempt to exploit your vulnerability. Or it could be someone trying to help me. Help you how? Mrs. Walker, you've just signed legal documents establishing professional oversight of your finances. You're protected now. Why would you risk that protection for anonymous messages from strangers? Because the protection felt like imprisonment. Because every safeguard seemed designed to keep her from making her own choices. Because her son was the only person in the room who didn't seem to have a financial stake in her decision-making. I'm going to Rosa's, she said quietly. Naomi, that's not wise, Tommy protested. After everything you've been through. After everything I've been through, I can make my own decisions about where I go and who I see. Actually, Dr. Holbrook interrupted gently. The conservatorship papers you signed give your appointed guardians authority over major life decisions. For your protection. Guardians. Plural. She looked at the papers she'd signed, really reading them for the first time. Matthew Walker and Thomas Chandler, co-guardians with joint authority over financial and personal decisions for Naomi Walker, pending psychiatric evaluation and court approval. Her ex-husband and her brother had just become her legal parents. You can't stop me from leaving my own house, she said. We can if you're presenting a danger to yourself or others, Dr. Holbrook replied. Walking alone into potentially dangerous situations qualifies as self-endangering behavior. The cage was shrinking around her, each word reducing her agency, her autonomy, her basic human right to make mistakes. Fine, Naomi said. Benjamin and Zoe come with me. Absolutely not, Matthew said immediately. The children stay here, where they are safe. Where they could be used as leverage to ensure her compliance. Zoe was still sitting on her lap, small arms wrapped around her neck like she could sense the adult tension even if she didn't understand it. Benjamin stood behind the couch like a young soldier, ready to defend his family against all comers. Mrs. Walker, Crawford said in his most reasonable tone, perhaps we could accompany you to this meeting? For security purposes. No. Then I'm afraid we can't allow you to go. Can't allow. The words struck her like physical blows. These people, her brother, her ex-husband, strangers who'd inserted themselves into her life, had just claimed the authority to control her movements. You can't allow me. Naomi's voice was dangerously quiet. Who exactly do you think you are? People who care about your well-being, Tommy said. Naomi, you're not thinking clearly. You've been through trauma. You're vulnerable to manipulation. I'm vulnerable to manipulation from you. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, the mask slipped, Tommy's concern replaced by irritation, Matthew's love revealed as calculation, Crawford's protection exposed as control. Mrs. Walker, Dr. Holbrook said carefully, this kind of paranoid thinking is exactly why professional intervention is necessary. You're seeing enemies where there are only people trying to help. But Naomi was done being managed, medicated, and manipulated. Something inside her chest was awakening, not hope, which felt too fragile, but anger. Clean, pure, righteous fury at being treated like a child who couldn't be trusted with her own life. Benjamin, Zoe, she said quietly, get your coats. Naomi, Matthew started. Get your coats, she repeated, her voice carrying absolute authority. We're leaving. I can't allow that, Crawford said, stepping between her and the door. Then you'll have to physically stop me. The challenge was calculated. If Crawford laid hands on her, if any of them used force to prevent her from leaving, their careful pretense of acting in her best interests would crumble. But if they let her go, they'd lose control of the narrative. Crawford made his choice. He nodded to one of his associates, who moved to block the front door. Mrs. Walker, for your own safety and the safety of your children, I'm placing you under protective custody pending further psychiatric evaluation. Protective custody. House arrest with a medical euphemism. That's when Naomi realized she'd been approaching this situation all wrong. She'd been trying to prove her sanity to people who profited from her being declared insane. She'd been seeking protection from people who were the threat. She'd been playing by rules designed to ensure she lost. Time to stop playing by their rules. Benjamin, she said without taking her eyes off Crawford, call 911. Tell them we're being held against our will by people who have no legal authority to detain us. You can't do that, Tommy protested. Watch me. Benjamin, make the call. Her son pulled out his phone with hands that shook slightly, but his voice was steady when he spoke to the operator. Yes, this is Benjamin Walker at 247 Maple Street. My mother, my sister, and I are being held prisoner in our own house by people who are trying to steal our money. Hang up that phone, Matthew demanded. No, Benjamin said simply. Yes, they are threatening us if we try to leave. Crawford's associate moved toward Benjamin, probably intending to take the phone by force. That's when Naomi discovered she had limits she hadn't known existed. Touch my son and I will end you. The words came out with such quiet menace that even Crawford's enforcer paused. Naomi had never threatened violence in her life, had never imagined herself capable of it. But watching a grown man move aggressively toward her 12-year-old son triggered something primal and unbreakable. Mrs. Walker, Crawford said carefully, you're becoming agitated. Dr. Holbrook, perhaps a mild sedative. Don't you dare. Naomi's voice cut through his like a blade. Don't you dare suggest drugging me in front of my children. Zoe was crying now, small sobs that broke Naomi's heart. Her 8-year-old daughter was watching her mother being systematically destroyed by people who spoke in gentle voices and professional tones. It's okay, baby, she whispered, stroking Zoe's hair. Mommy's going to fix this. But how? She'd signed papers that gave these people legal authority over her life. She'd been declared mentally incompetent by a licensed psychiatrist. She was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and increasingly certain that the police who'd respond to Benjamin's call would be more interested in maintaining order than ensuring justice. That's when she heard it, sirens in the distance, but not the slow, measured approach of police responding to a domestic disturbance. These sirens were urgent, multiple vehicles moving fast. Crawford heard them too, his expression shifting from confidence to concern. That's a lot of sirens for one 911 call, Benjamin observed with 12-year-old logic. Through the window, Naomi could see vehicles approaching, not just police cars, but FBI units, state investigator vehicles, and news vans that looked more professional than the local crews that had been camping on her lawn. Mr. Crawford, Dr. Holbrook said nervously, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. But Crawford was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in urgent whispers to someone on the other end. What's happening? Tommy asked, his confidence finally cracking. Naomi's phone rang. The caller ID showed Rosa's number. Answer it, Crawford ordered. Put it on speaker. But Naomi was done taking orders. She answered the call and held the phone to her ear. Mija, are you safe? For now. Rosa, there are sirens. That's because the real lottery officials are on their way. The real ones, not the fake ones who tried to steal from you. Along with the FBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and about 6 news crews who are very interested in exposing lottery fraud operations. Through the window, Naomi could see Crawford's black sedan being surrounded by federal agents. Other agents were approaching her front door with the kind of purposeful movement that suggested they weren't here to ask polite questions. Rosa, how did you? Remember James Churchill? The fake lottery official? Turns out he's actually Detective James Churchill, Georgia Bureau of Investigation. He's been undercover for 8 months, investigating Crawford Financial Services for lottery fraud. You weren't their victim, Mija. You were their test case. The world tilted sideways. James Churchill had been real law enforcement, but not Lottery Corporation, state police running a sting operation against Crawford and his associates. Everything you suspected was true, Rosa continued. But the good guys were watching the whole time, gathering evidence. They just needed Crawford to commit the actual crimes before they could move. Which meant the conservatorship papers she'd signed were evidence of fraud, not legal documents. Her psychiatric evaluation was part of a criminal conspiracy, not medical intervention. Every manipulation, every threat, every violation of her autonomy had been recorded, documented, and was about to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The front door opened, and real federal agents entered with professional efficiency. Not Crawford's people wearing uniforms, but legitimate law enforcement with credentials that would stand up to scrutiny. Vincent Crawford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, and criminal impersonation of government officials. As they read Crawford his rights, Naomi felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks, genuine relief. Not the false security of signing papers that stole her autonomy, but the real safety of watching criminals face consequences for their actions. Mrs. Walker. One of the agents approached her with respectful courtesy. I'm Agent Sarah Chandler with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. We apologize for the deception, but Detective Churchill's undercover operation required us to let this play out until we had sufficient evidence for prosecution. My children are safe, have always been safe. We've had surveillance on your family since the lottery win was announced. If there had been any real danger, we would have intervened immediately. Benjamin and Zoe pressed closer to her sides as they watched Matthew being questioned by federal agents. Tommy was arguing loudly about his rights and his ignorance of any criminal activity, but his expensive lawyers were notably absent from his defense. What happens now? Naomi asked. Now you claim your lottery prize legitimately, with real lottery officials and real legal protections. The conservatorship papers you signed are void. They were obtained through fraud and have no legal standing. Your ex-husband has no authority over your finances or your children. Agent Chandler handed her a business card, simple, official, with the GBI logo and a phone number that probably connected to a real government office. Detective Churchill will be contacting you tomorrow to discuss the case and answer any questions you might have. But tonight, Mrs. Walker, you're free to make your own choices about your own life. Free. The word felt foreign after days of manipulation and control, but it also felt like coming home. As Crawford and his associates were led away in handcuffs, as Matthew was questioned about his role in the conspiracy, as Tommy was forced to confront the consequences of his greed, Naomi realized she'd passed the ultimate test. She'd faced her deepest fear, losing her children, losing her agency, losing herself to forces beyond her control, and discovered that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to risk everything to fight for it. The lottery ticket was still in her purse, unspent and unclaimed. $200 million that represented not just financial security, but the power to make choices based on what she wanted rather than what she could afford. For the first time since the numbers were drawn, she felt worthy of that power. Come on, kids, she said, gathering Benjamin and Zoe close. Let's go see Rosa. I think it's time to officially claim our prize. Outside, the sun was setting over Riverdale, but for the first time in weeks, tomorrow looked brighter than today. The real Georgia Lottery headquarters in Atlanta was nothing like the luxurious backdrop James Churchill had used for his deceptive video calls. It was a modest government building with fluorescent lighting and worn carpet, staffed by people who looked like they processed paperwork for a living rather than managed vast fortunes. But it was real. Every credential checked out, every procedure was transparent, and every person Naomi met seemed genuinely committed to protecting lottery winners rather than exploiting them. Mrs. Walker, Director Patricia Holbrook, said as she led them through the security checkpoint, I want to personally apologize for what you've endured. The Crawford organization has been operating for 3 years, and you're the first winner who managed to expose their entire operation. Patricia Holbrook, the same name the fake James Churchill had told her to ask for when verifying his credentials. Even that had been calculated manipulation, using real names and real positions to legitimize fake interactions. How many other winners did they target? Naomi asked. 17 that we know of. Some lost everything. Others, like yourself, fought back before it was too late. Patricia's expression was grim. Your case gave us the evidence we needed to shut them down permanently. They walked past walls lined with photographs of legitimate lottery winners, ordinary people holding oversized checks, smiling with the uncomplicated joy of sudden good fortune. None of them looked like they'd been through psychological warfare to claim their prizes. Mom, this place is so normal, Zoe observed, peering around the modest office space. It's not fancy like the place on TV. That's because it's real, baby, Naomi replied. Real things don't always look like movie sets. Benjamin had been quiet since leaving Riverdale, processing the revelation that the adults in his life had spent days lying to him about everything that mattered. Now he walked close to Naomi's side, his protective instincts still on high alert. Mrs. Walker, Patricia continued, before we proceed with the official claim ceremony, there's something you should know. Someone very special has been working behind the scenes to protect you. She led them to a conference room where Detective James Churchill waited, looking remarkably different out of his expensive suit. In casual clothes, he appeared younger, more approachable, more like the kind teacher he'd originally seemed to be. Mrs. Walker, he said, standing as they entered. I owe you an explanation and an apology. You were undercover, Naomi said. Investigating Crawford Financial Services. Yes, but not from the beginning. When you won the lottery, we had no idea Crawford would target you. The investigation started because of someone else entirely. James gestured toward the door, where Rosa Martinez was entering with the confident stride of someone who belonged in law enforcement briefings. Rosa. Naomi stared at her friend in confusion. What are you doing here? Waiting for you to claim your prize, Mija. Rosa's weathered face split into a proud grin. Just like I've been waiting for Crawford to make the mistake that would finally bring him down. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Rosa, who'd been her anchor through the worst days of the divorce. Rosa, who'd insisted she was worthy of better treatment. Rosa, who'd somehow known exactly who to call when everything went wrong. I don't understand, Naomi said. Detective Churchill pulled out a folder of photographs and documents. Rosa's daughter, Maria, won a smaller lottery prize 4 years ago. $50,000, enough to change her life, but not enough to attract major media attention. He spread the photos across the conference table. Maria Martinez, young and radiant, holding a check outside a convenience store. Maria with her family, celebrating their good fortune. Maria 6 months later, looking haggard and desperate. Crawford targeted her because smaller winners don't have the same legal protections as major jackpot winners. They convinced her to sign investment papers that turned her $50,000 into their $50,000. By the time she realized what had happened, the money was gone and she had no legal recourse. Rosa's expression hardened. My daughter worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school. That money was going to pay off her student loans, give her a fresh start. Instead, she's still paying off debt from loans they convinced her to take against money she thought she had. Rosa came to us 6 months ago, Detective Churchill continued. She'd been researching Crawford Financial Services, trying to find other victims, building a case. When your lottery win was announced, she called our office immediately. To warn you, Naomi breathed. To protect you. Rosa knew Crawford would target a major winner, and she wasn't going to let them destroy another family. The scope of Rosa's sacrifice became clear. For months, she'd been working with law enforcement, probably spending her own money on investigation costs, dedicating her time to exposing the people who'd stolen from her daughter. Rosa, why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to react naturally when they approached you. If you'd known they were criminals from the start, you would have called the police immediately. We needed them to commit crimes we could prove in court. So you let me think I was going crazy. You let me believe I was losing everything. Rosa's face crumpled with genuine remorse. Mija, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. Watching you suffer, knowing I could stop it at any moment but having to wait for the evidence we needed. There were times I almost broke, almost told you everything. Like when you called during the fake psychiatric evaluation. Exactly like that. When I heard what they were putting you through, I almost blew the entire operation. But Detective Churchill convinced me that stopping them permanently was more important than stopping your immediate pain. Naomi stared at her friend, trying to reconcile this new information with everything she'd experienced. Rosa had watched her suffer to protect other potential victims. The woman who'd been her rock through the divorce had orchestrated her psychological torment for the greater good. Are you angry? Rosa asked quietly. The question hung in the air while Naomi processed the full scope of what had happened. She'd been manipulated by criminals, but also by law enforcement. She'd been protected by deception as much as threatened by it. I should be, she said finally. But I'm not. Rosa, your daughter lost $50,000. If we hadn't stopped Crawford, how many other families would have lost everything? Based on their pattern, Detective Churchill said, they were targeting progressively larger prizes. Your 200 million would have been their biggest score, and probably the seed money for a national operation. The mathematics of justice were staggering. By enduring days of psychological manipulation, she'd prevented Crawford from stealing potentially billions of dollars from future lottery winners across the country. Mrs. Walker, Patricia Holbrook interjected gently, we understand this has been traumatic. If you need time to process everything before claiming your prize. No, Naomi said firmly. I've waited long enough. My children have waited long enough. Let's make this official. The prize claim ceremony was surprisingly simple. Naomi signed legitimate documents with real lottery officials while Director Holbrook explained her payout options. Lump sum or annuity, tax implications, investment guidance from actual financial advisors with verifiable credentials. I'll take the lump sum, she decided. After everything we've been through, I want the security of knowing the money is really ours. $120 million after taxes. More money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes, enough to ensure her children never experienced the grinding poverty that had shaped her own childhood. But as she held the official check that represented her family's financial freedom, Naomi found herself thinking not about what she could buy, but about what she could build. "Detective Churchill," she said, "what happens to Crawford's other victims? The families who already lost their money." "Criminal restitution, hopefully. But recovery of stolen assets is always complicated. Many of his victims will never get back what they lost." "What about Maria, Rosa's daughter?" "Crawford spent her money years ago. Even with full asset seizure, there might not be enough to compensate all the victims." Naomi looked at Rosa, this woman who'd sacrificed months of her life to bring down the people who'd stolen from her daughter, who'd watched a friend suffer to prevent strangers from experiencing the same loss. "I want to establish a victim compensation fund," Naomi said, "for everyone Crawford targeted. Full restitution for financial losses, plus compensation for emotional damages." "Naomi," Rosa protested, "you don't owe us anything." "I don't owe you money," Naomi agreed. "I owe you justice. And justice means making sure Crawford's victims are made whole, not just that he goes to prison." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. She was talking about giving away millions of dollars to people she'd never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. "Mrs. Walker," Patricia said carefully, "that's an incredibly generous gesture, but you should take time to consider." "I've had plenty of time to consider what money means," Naomi interrupted. "For most of my life, I thought it meant security. Then I won it and discovered it meant vulnerability. Now I understand what it actually means." She stood up, still holding the check that represented more wealth than most people could imagine. "Money means choice. The choice to be generous or selfish. The choice to lift people up or let them fall. The choice to use power responsibly or abuse it for personal gain." Benjamin and Zoe flanked her sides, her son standing taller than she'd seen him in weeks, her daughter beaming with pride she probably didn't fully understand yet. Crawford and his people made their choices. Matthew made his. Tommy made his. Now I get to make mine. She turned to Detective Churchill. "How much would it take to fully compensate all of Crawford's victims?" "Approximately $8 million for direct financial restitution. Another $2 million for documented expenses and damages. $10 million. Less than 10% of her lottery winnings, but enough to restore the lives of 17 families who'd been systematically robbed." "Consider it done," she said simply. Rosa was crying now, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Mija, you don't understand what this means. Maria can finally finish nursing school. She can start her life." "I understand perfectly," Naomi replied. "It means families get their dreams back. It means Crawford's victims become Crawford's survivors. It means justice isn't just about punishment, it's about restoration." Patricia Holbrook was staring at her with something approaching awe. "Mrs. Walker, in 20 years of processing lottery claims, I've never seen a winner make this kind of decision this quickly. That's because most winners haven't been through what I've been through. Most people don't get to see firsthand what greed does to families, what exploitation looks like, what it means to have your dignity stripped away by people who think money makes them superior." She looked around the room at these people who'd worked so hard to protect her from forces she hadn't even known existed. "Crawford thought I was vulnerable because I was poor, because I was divorced, because I was a waitress who couldn't possibly understand high finance. He was wrong about everything except the vulnerable part." Naomi walked to the window overlooking downtown Atlanta, where thousands of people were living their ordinary lives, unaware that lottery fraud operations existed, that criminals targeted sudden wealth, that winning the jackpot could become its own form of prison. "I was vulnerable," she continued, "but not because I was poor or uneducated or naive. I was vulnerable because I'd forgotten my own worth. I'd let Matthew convince me I was lucky to be tolerated. I'd let Tommy convince me I needed his approval. I'd let society convince me that people like me don't deserve extraordinary things." She turned back to face the room, and her voice carried an authority that hadn't been there before the lottery win, before the manipulation, before the fight for her family's survival. "But here's what Crawford never understood. Being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak. It means being human. And humans, when they remember their worth, are capable of extraordinary things." The check in her hands represented more than money now. It represented proof that ordinary people could face extraordinary challenges and emerge not just victorious, but transformed. "Detective Churchill, I want to do more than just compensate Crawford's victims. I want to prevent future victims. What would it take to fund a permanent lottery winner protection program?" James smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it looked completely genuine. Mrs. Walker, you're thinking like someone who understands that real security comes from making sure the threats don't exist in the first place. Exactly. How much? For a comprehensive program. Education for new winners, legal support, fraud detection, victim assistance? 20 million would fund it for a decade. $20 million. Still less than 20% of her winnings, but enough to protect hundreds of future lottery winners from experiencing what she'd endured. Consider that done too, she said. Rosa was openly sobbing now. Benjamin was staring at his mother with obvious pride. Zoe was playing with the ceremonial pen they'd given her, probably not understanding the magnitude of what she'd just witnessed but sensing its importance. Mrs. Walker, Patricia said softly, you've just allocated $30 million to help other people. Are you sure you've thought this through? Naomi looked at her children, these beautiful souls who'd watched their mother fight for her dignity and win. Who'd seen her refuse to let greed and manipulation destroy their family. Who'd learned that having power meant using it responsibly. I've thought it through completely, she said. $90 million is still more money than my family can spend in our lifetimes. But $30 million used to protect and restore other families. That's not an expense, it's an investment in the kind of world I want my children to live in. As they prepared to leave the lottery headquarters, Detective Churchill pulled her aside for a private word. Mrs. Walker, what you've done today will be national news. You're going to be famous not just as a lottery winner, but as someone who chose generosity over greed. Are you prepared for that kind of attention? Naomi thought about the media circus that had surrounded her house, the reporters who'd turned her personal crisis into entertainment, the way her story had been twisted to fit whatever narrative sold the most advertising. Detective Churchill, for the past week, people have been telling my story without asking me what it actually was. They've made assumptions about who I am, what I want, what I deserve. She looked through the window at Benjamin and Zoe, who were animatedly discussing something with Rosa while they waited for her. From now on, I get to tell my own story. And my story is that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary generosity when they remember their worth. As they walked out of the Georgia Lottery headquarters, Naomi felt something she hadn't experienced since before her marriage started falling apart: pride. Not the defensive pride that came from proving others wrong, but the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she'd made choices worthy of the woman she wanted to be. The sun was setting over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the parking lot where they'd parked Rosa's ancient pickup truck. Tomorrow, she'd need to buy a new car. Tomorrow, she'd need to find a new house, maybe in a new town where her children could start fresh. Tomorrow, she'd need to figure out how to live with wealth in a way that honored the struggle that had brought her here. But tonight, she was still Naomi Walker from Riverdale, Georgia. The divorced waitress who'd refused to let anyone steal her dignity or her children's future. And that woman, she'd discovered, was worth more than any lottery jackpot could ever measure. 6 months later, Naomi stood in the same courthouse hallway where her marriage had officially ended, but this time she wasn't trembling. The marble walls that had once felt cold and judgmental now seemed simply functional, part of a building where legal matters were resolved rather than a temple where dreams went to die. Mrs. Walker, her new attorney said, approaching with papers that would finalize Matthew's relinquishment of all parental rights, his waiving his right to be present for the hearing. The custody transfer will be uncontested. Matthew had disappeared from Riverdale 3 weeks after Crawford's arrest, once it became clear that his role in the conspiracy would result in criminal charges rather than a windfall. His girlfriend had left him when the money didn't materialize. His job at the auto shop had ended when customers stopped trusting a man who'd tried to steal from his own children. The last communication she'd received from him was a text message that simply read, "I'm sorry. Take care of our kids." It wasn't the closure she'd once imagined wanting, but it was honest in a way their marriage had never been. "How are you feeling about this?" her attorney asked. Naomi looked through the courthouse windows at the parking lot where she'd first learned that people could be cruel when they thought you were powerless. Now she saw the same space differently, not as a place of judgment, but as a place where justice could actually be served. "I'm feeling free," she said simply. The custody hearing took less than 15 minutes. Judge Patricia Chapman, Janet Chapman's older sister, which would have once felt like cosmic injustice, reviewed the paperwork with professional efficiency and declared Naomi the sole legal guardian of Benjamin and Zoe Walker. "Mrs. Walker," Judge Chapman said as she signed the final papers, "I want you to know that the victim compensation fund you established has already helped 3 families in our county. That kind of generosity doesn't go unnoticed." Outside the courthouse, Benjamin and Zoe waited with Rosa in the new car Naomi had bought, a practical SUV that could handle Georgia weather and growing children, nothing flashy enough to draw unwanted attention. "How did it go, Mom?" Benjamin asked as she climbed into the driver's seat. "It went perfectly. You two are officially, completely, legally mine." Zoe bounced in her booster seat. "We were always yours, Mummy." "Yes, baby, but now the paperwork agrees with us." They drove through downtown Riverdale, past the diner where she'd worked for 8 years, past the elementary school where both children had learned to read, past the neighborhoods where she'd lived her entire adult life. The town looked smaller now, not because her world had expanded, though it had, but because she'd stopped seeing it as the boundary of what was possible for someone like her. "Rosa," she said as they pulled into the diner's parking lot, "are you sure about this?" Rosa Martinez climbed out of the passenger seat with the confident stride of someone about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime. At 62, she was retiring from waitressing to manage the Naomi Walker Foundation for lottery winner protection. "Mija, I've been slinging coffee and pie for 40 years. It's time to do something that matters on a bigger scale." The foundation had grown beyond Naomi's initial vision. In addition to victim compensation and fraud prevention, they now provided financial counseling for new lottery winners, legal support for those facing exploitation, and educational programs about the psychological challenges of sudden wealth. Rosa would run the day-to-day operations from an office in Atlanta while Naomi focused on funding expansion and policy advocacy. Together, they'd turn her traumatic experience into protection for thousands of future winners. "Besides," Rosa continued with a grin, "Maria starts her new job at Children's Healthcare next week. Debt-free, degree completed, ready to save lives. You gave my daughter her future back." The Victim Compensation Fund had exceeded even Naomi's expectations. 17 families had received full restitution, plus funding for therapy, legal fees, and educational expenses that had been derailed by Crawford's theft. 3 small businesses had been saved from bankruptcy. 2 families had avoided foreclosure. Maria Martinez was just one of dozens of people whose lives had been restored by Naomi's decision to share rather than hoard her unexpected fortune. Inside Rosa's diner, the lunch rush was winding down. The familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease felt like coming home, even though Naomi knew this was probably the last time she'd enter as a regular part of this world. "Naomi." The voice belonged to Mrs. Chandler, Tommy's wife, who'd spent months avoiding eye contact after her husband's arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. "I heard you were in town. How are you doing?" The question carried genuine concern rather than gossip-gathering intent. Tommy's criminal trial had humbled his entire family, forcing them to confront the difference between success and integrity. "I'm doing well, Mrs. Chandler. How's Tommy handling prison?" "He's learning. Finally understanding that family means more than business opportunities." Mrs. Chandler's voice was thick with shame and regret. "He asked me to tell you how sorry he is. For everything." Tommy would serve 18 months in federal prison for his role in the conservatorship fraud. His hardware store had been sold to pay legal fees and restitution. His family was starting over financially, but they were also starting over as people who understood the cost of choosing greed over love. "Tell him I forgive him," Naomi said, and meant it. "Tell him that family means being there for each other's mistakes, not just each other's successes." They settled into their usual booth, Naomi, Benjamin, Zoe, and Rosa, for what would probably be their last meal together in this place. The lunch special was meatloaf and mashed potatoes, the same comfort food that had sustained her through the worst days of her divorce. "Mom," Benjamin said, picking at his food, "are you sure about moving to Atlanta? I mean, I know Riverdale has bad memories, but it has good ones too." He was 13 now, taller and more serious, but still the boy who'd defended her honor with his fists when words weren't enough. The past 6 months had changed him, teaching him that adults could be fallible, that justice wasn't automatic, that protecting family sometimes required impossible courage. "What good memories?" she asked gently. "This booth. Rosa's stories. Learning to drive stick shift in the diner parking lot on Sundays. Mrs. Henderson teaching me to change a tire when Dad was too busy." He paused, his voice dropping. "You, always fighting for us even when everything was falling apart." The memories he chose surprised her. Not grand adventures or expensive purchases, but small moments of connection, learning, community support. The ordinary magic that happened when people cared about each other despite their flaws. "Those memories come with us," Naomi said. "And we'll make new ones. Better ones, because now we get to choose where we go and who we become." Zoe looked up from her chocolate milk. Will we visit here sometimes? Whenever you want, baby. This will always be where we learned we were stronger than we knew. After lunch, they drove to their old house on Maple Street one last time. The new owners had already moved in, a young family with small children who'd gotten an excellent deal on a house that came with some unusual local notoriety. Naomi parked across the street and let herself remember the woman who'd lived here 6 months ago. The divorced waitress who'd believed she deserved whatever scraps life threw her way. Who'd accepted Matthew's contempt and Tommy's condescension because she'd forgotten her own worth. That woman had been struggling to survive in a world that felt designed to keep her small. The woman sitting in this car was designing a world where others could grow large. Ready? Rosa asked. Naomi looked at her children, these remarkable souls who'd watched their mother fight for her dignity and learned that fighting was sometimes the most loving thing you could do. Benjamin, who was already talking about studying law so he could protect families like his from people like Crawford. Zoe, who'd started a piggy bank to help other kids whose daddies are mean. They'd learned that money was power, but power was responsibility. That winning meant lifting others up, not just climbing higher yourself. That being vulnerable didn't mean being weak. It meant being human enough to recognize when other humans needed help. I'm ready, she said. As they drove out of Riverdale toward their new life in Atlanta, Naomi caught sight of the quick stop where she'd bought the lottery ticket that changed everything. The same elderly clerk was working the counter, probably selling hope to other struggling people who needed to believe that tomorrow could be different from today. She'd been one of those people just 6 months ago. Now she was proof that sometimes hope was more than a fantasy, sometimes it was a preview. The Crawford Financial Services building had been converted into a community center for families recovering from financial exploitation. The fake lottery headquarters where she'd been manipulated was now legitimate office space for the Victim Services Foundation she'd funded. Even Crawford's crimes had been transformed into something that served justice rather than greed. At the Atlanta city limits, Benjamin asked the question she'd been expecting. Mom, do you ever regret winning the lottery? I mean, it brought a lot of bad people into our lives. Naomi considered the question seriously. The lottery win had exposed her to manipulation, fraud, and betrayal by people she'd trusted. It had forced her children to grow up faster than they should have. It had cost them the simple anonymity of ordinary life. But it had also revealed her own strength, Rosa's fierce loyalty, and the difference between people who loved her and people who loved her money. It had given her the power to restore justice for families she'd never met and prevent future victims from experiencing the exploitation she'd endured. Most importantly, it had taught her that she was worth fighting for. No, honey, she said finally. I don't regret it. But I also don't think the lottery changed who we are. I think it revealed who we were all along. In the rearview mirror, Riverdale disappeared behind trees and distance, becoming just another small town in Georgia rather than the whole world. Ahead of them, Atlanta's skyline rose like a promise of possibilities they hadn't yet imagined. The radio was playing softly, some country song about second chances and new beginnings. Rosa was humming along, Benjamin was reading a book about criminal justice, and Zoe was drawing pictures of their new house, the one with the big yard and the room that would become her art studio. They were still the same family who'd left the courthouse 6 months ago with nothing but each other and a lottery ticket. But they were also completely different people, transformed by the discovery that they were worth fighting for and capable of fighting back. Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Churchill. Saw the news about the Foundation's expansion. Congratulations on changing the world, one family at a time. One family at a time. It was a good way to think about making a difference, not through grand gestures that made headlines, but through individual acts of love and justice that rippled outward until they became waves of change. As the sun set over Georgia, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility, Naomi realized she'd finally learned what the lottery ticket had really been worth. Not $200 million, but the discovery that she'd always been priceless. What did this story teach you about recognizing your own worth even when others try to diminish it? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.